Welcome to the Equine Vet Connect podcast. I'm your host, Dan Carter. I'm a veterinarian and a farrier. The goal of this podcast is to educate horse people, break things down, bust myths, and keep it real. Speaking of breaking things down, here's my legal disclaimer to keep my attorney and insurance company happy. While I am a vet, I may not be your vet. Contact them before trying anything you hear on this podcast. Remember, just because you watched it on YouTube or heard it on a podcast does not mean you can do it. Please use common sense. Welcome back to the Equine Vet Connect podcast here at Countryside Equine Hospital. Got Dr. Brown with me today. We're in the old studio again, Treatment Room 1, doing a little recording. For those of you that are looking and watching this on YouTube, we're going to say that today's podcast is brought to you by Guinness. They're not actually sponsoring anything, but by the end of this podcast, you'll understand why there's Guinness on the table.
Big fan of Guinness here
Are
for
you?
many reasons.
It's always been too dark for me. I'm kind of a lager, pilsner kind of guy.
I'm not usually a dark beer person, but it's there's just something about a Guinness. It's just crisp and nice on a nice hot day.
That sounds real heavy. Like, I've never been an Irish stout guy. Like the oatmeal stouts, more the German type stouts. I will get a little snobby on those, but yeah, this episode is not about us drinking beer, but eventually we're going to talk about your horse partaking in the Guinness. If you are watching, you probably noticed that the thing is turned around backwards. We got a new editing software, and it's doing something that we don't understand. So just know that's Guinness, but it's spelled backwards. So
It's above our pay grade. It's all the behind the scenes.
yes,
things.
this is for April and Casey to figure out.
Yeah.
Like, I don't
It's all the
quite know what to do about this.
It's for all the people that are like, I think I want to start a podcast, and then now that we're in the podcast, it's like, oh wait, it's not just going on and talking. There's a lot of things.
We had this idea. It seemed pretty easy. For those of you listening, it is easy. But if you're actually watching, there's a lot to this. And, we're definitely learning every day. We're getting close to 50 episodes. Make sure y'all tune in for episode number 50. All I'm going to say, it's going to be a good one.
It is going to be a good one.
We've got a special episode. Should we go ahead and tell them what it is?
No.
Okay, I won't tell you.
Keep it quiet.
All right, so why are we talking about Guinness beer on this podcast?
We're going to talk about some anhidrosis today.
Anhidrosis. This is a great topic for July because it's
peak anhidrosis season.
Yes. So for those of you who don't know, anhidrosis is Latin for not sweating. And it's basically when your horse decides, to heck with it, I'm done, I'm not sweating anymore.
Yes.
So
it's very annoying. It can be very annoying. It can be very detrimental. It can be fatal if we don't do anything about it. So
and it can be sudden onset.
Yes.
I mean, they can be sweating like crazy on Monday, and on Tuesday they're like, nope, not going to do it anymore. So let's dig into it. Let's talk a little bit about why we sweat, how we sweat, and talk about anhidrosis, and then let's talk about all the treatment options that don't work.
Yeah. The science of sweat.
Yes.
That's what I called it. So, fun fact, because this is going to be a factual-based podcast, because if you see, Dan actually did his own research for today's podcast. He wrote his own notes.
I did it.
Yeah.
It's sitting straight from memory, which normally it is.
Yeah.
I actually did a little research.
He actually did research today, because what we kind of came to the conclusion about this is we really don't know a lot about why this happens and what it is. But here's our fun fact, is that horses and primates are the only animals that sweat.
Really?
Yes. And horses are particularly sweaty. They sweat about 2 times as much per square inch of skin compared to humans.
Yeah, another fun fact of the day, horses have 810 sweat glands per square centimeter.
That's a fact.
That's some facts.
That's a lot of sweat.
That is a lot of sweat glands.
Yes. So horses are very sweaty creatures.
Yes.
And, anhidrosis is, like we said, it's the lack of sweat, but there's kind of a lot of flavors of it when we talk about it. There's horses that just don't sweat at all completely. There's horses that stop sweating in certain parts of their body. There's horses that just have a kind of decreased amount of sweat. But regardless, we all call it anhidrosis if we have a difficulty doing this.
Well, let's kind of talk about why is sweat important. It's not just there to get your tack wet. It's not there just to make you have to bathe your horse more often. It actually has an important role.
It is very important for thermoregulation in horses. There's kind of a lot of different ways that your body deals with getting rid of heat. And in horses in particular, they get rid of about 70% of their body heat through sweating.
Yes.
And what happens is, your body starts realizing that it's too hot. So thermoregulation starts in the hypothalamus. So this is kind of your control center of your brain. And it gets these signals that your body's too hot, whether that's your internal temperature from exercising and producing too much heat, or your skin is getting too hot, like you're sitting out in the sun. Hypothalamus says body's too hot. That's going to activate your sympathetic nervous system and start sending signals to your sweat glands to start sweating, which is basically mostly water, but there's also electrolyte component. So sodium and chloride are kind of your main contributors to that. That's where we think of salt being kind of, the sweat being kind of salty.
That's the white stuff you see. Like if your horse has been really sweaty, the white stuff you see on your horse is actually salt.
That's actually, so there's another thing in there. It's a protein called latherine.
Well, that's what makes them all foamy.
That makes it foamy, yeah. So that one, I was like, oh, that's interesting. It's like a detergent protein. But
I was thinking like the white stuff, like after they dry off.
Oh, yeah, that's the salt, yeah. So, and horses have actually a lot more of an electrolyte component to their sweat compared to humans. So that's where, when we talk about, rehydration, it's not just water that we need. It's electrolytes that you also need to replenish.
Yes. And it's when you talk about sweating, we got to talk a little bit about evaporative cooling.
Yes.
Because that's the simplest way to understand this. If you think about it, if you get water on your skin and the wind blows, it provides a cooling effect because when that water evaporates, it takes heat with it. I don't want to get into like heat transfer. I'm not a thermodynamic engineer, but all I know is we're going to move heat. Heat's the only thing that moves. We don't cool anything. We remove heat. And, when it evaporates, and this is important too when you live in a warmer climate, especially in the southeast like we do, it's hot and humid. And when both of those factors go up, your evaporative cooling will actually go down.
Yes.
Because the air, like down here, our air can get so saturated, it can't absorb any more water. And then when that happens, your evaporative cooling actually goes down. And that's why it's such a bigger deal in the Gulf Coast states than it is somewhere in like the Midwest or even out in the drier, more arid climates of, it may be hotter out in the desert, but the humidity is lower, so evaporative cooling is actually working out there. Here, we can get so hot and so humid that evaporative cooling just quits working.
Right, which is kind of one of the theories behind why anhidrosis is a thing down here and not seen in other places. But there's been reports of anhidrosis kind of all over in all different climates. So it's not really the only component. That's, again, one of the things that we kind of learned as we were researching this is we don't really know why it happens.
Not a clue. We know all about the neural and hormonal control of the sweat gland. We can get all the way down into what happens at a cellular level with that sweat gland. But bottom line, we have no idea why they just done.
No.
Done.
Ugh. It's crazy.
So yeah, when we lose that ability to sweat, now we lose our ability to cool. And when that happens, this is when things go awry.
Yes.
We see this huge increase in body temp. I mean, when I say big increase, I mean 105s, 106s. And you've got to be careful because at 107, now you're in heat stroke territory. And this is a big deal because when you get into heat stroke, now you've got organ failure. This is where the whole body is like too hot to operate. You start getting into multisystemic organ failure. And this is a really dangerous place for horses and people to be.
And this doesn't just affect our athletes. So
No.
I think a lot of people think that, this is only a problem if the horse is, actively riding or competing or exercising. And that's not the case at all. I mean, we see this in a lot of horses that are just pasture ornaments standing out in a field and they can't sweat. And this can be a huge issue because, again, like you said, as their body temperature starts to go up, we're getting into that organ failure. And, for our athletes, this is where exercise intolerance becomes a thing. They're going to tire out easily. We may even not even be able to compete them.
Correct.
In the summer. And, down here, show season is big down here in summer.
We go all year round, and in summer we're still going pretty hard, and it really does take a toll on these athletes. And like you said, it's not just athletes. Just because you don't have an athlete doesn't mean you don't have to worry about this. I've seen it in plenty of pasture horses.
Oh, yes.
I've seen it, you name a breed, discipline, use, everything from pasture horses to elite athletes. I have seen anhidrosis in these cases.
And I think a lot of the data that comes out of anhidrosis research, there's numbers, but then there's also what the people in the field are seeing. And, I think anecdotally, a lot of us are seeing this in horses that they were up north and then they moved down here. They seem to be maybe more susceptible to it than others, but just because a horse is born down here doesn't mean that they're immune to it either. I mean,
Correct.
we see it in tons of horses that they've never left their property, and
Well,
it still happens to them.
And that's the thing is when you're dealing, especially, I think the statistics are you're 2 times more likely to develop anhidrosis if you come from an area, a cooler, drier area, into one of the more hot, humid Gulf Coast states. I read one statistic: 2 to 6% of horses in Florida are affected by this.
Yes.
That may not seem like a big number, but when you really think about it, that's pretty significant.
It's a lot of horses.
That means 6 in 100 horses have this. I mean, you're getting close to 1 in 10.
I think they were saying too that, they just start asking, barn managers, and they were saying that the majority of barn managers have at least one horse
Correct.
that they're in charge of that suffers from this.
We have that's what I've seen.
Yeah.
In the larger barns, there's at least one.
And that horse is usually miserable.
It's pretty rough for them in the summertime, especially down here, because I mean we're already in the 90s, high 90s, and we run high humidity down here.
And it doesn't cool off at night either. And that was one of
doesn't.
the other theories is, it's that drop in temperature that can sometimes like turn on and off the ability to sweat or evaporate that sweat. And so there was one statistic I read about what they said it's more likely to happen in places where the nighttime temperature stays above 80 degrees Fahrenheit, which
Not uncommon here.
yeah, that's not uncommon here. Definitely down in Florida for sure.
Right.
But I was like, okay, that's kind of interesting. Again, that's a lot of things are very anecdotal, and especially when we get into the management of this is where.
Yes, when we get into that, we're going to go down some rabbit holes there. But no, and I think it's important to remember what to look for, and recognize these clinical signs, because the sooner we can catch this, the better success we have. And this is where I tell people, be vigilant.
Yes.
Because we don't want to see those 106s and 107s. Like if we can catch them at like 103s, we don't have them. It's not as systemically. It's not as hard on them. And one of the things is like pay attention. If you're riding your horse and you look around and every other horse is sweaty, and yours is not, maybe you ought to start paying attention.
To look into.
If you see that respiratory rate going up, like one of the things that we often get called on is horses in a pasture, and his respiratory rate is extremely high. He's breathing really, really fast. And so we get called out because I think it's a respiratory issue. We get there, we temp this horse, it's sitting there at 105. He's got no sweat production whatsoever, and that's a huge thing that we're probably looking at anhidrosis.
Right. And again, horses are very sweaty creatures. They have 800 something sweat glands.
810 per square centimeter.
Per square centimeter.
There's a lot of square centimeters on a horse.
And so a lot of people, when they say, oh, well, they are sweating, they're only feeling certain parts of their body.
Right.
I think where we think of sweat, we're like, oh, it's, kind of in the armpits or like down in the groin area. They get really sweaty under their mane. So sometimes these are the parts that people are looking at. They're like, well, there's sweat here. But I'm like, but look at the rest of their body.
Yes.
Look at the rest of their body. There's a lot of surface area here that we're not sweating at all. And, when we're sitting in the 90s and the hundreds and our horse isn't doing that, we say, hey, this is still an issue. Even though it's not a complete shutdown of the sweating, we're still not sweating the way that we need to.
Correct. It can be a partial anhidrosis.
And again, it's still anhidrosis at the end of the day.
And the other things to watch for, too, is if you start to notice you're having a lot more dry, flaky skin.
Yes.
that can tell you like, hey, we've been having some issues. A lot of times these horses get this real dry, flaky skin. Some of them can get an alopecia with a hair loss. You'll see decreased appetite. They're no different than us. I mean, if it's 100 degrees and you're working outside, you're not really into going and eating a big meal. You know? Decrease, and then the hard part is you actually see a decrease in water intake.
Yeah.
And that's the last thing we need. But here we are.
So, because these sweat glands will actually atrophy over time, and these ones that are really chronic, those sweat glands they're gone.
Right, we start losing them.
And then now we're really up a creek because
right.
we can't do anything with that.
And that's one of the things we'll get into when we talk about management of these horses. Both short and long-term management is important because long-term chronic anhidrosis does lead to that atrophy of the sweat glands. So even if they start back sweating again, they still can't produce as much sweat as they normally would. And you can end up in this cycle where you keep losing sweat glands and you really end up in trouble because you don't have the ability to produce enough sweat for that evaporative cooling. So, well, let's talk about some of the tests we have. They're not great. I'd say clinical signs is probably 99% of it.
Yes. I've seen one of the diagnostic tests for these done, and I think it was just because it was a little bit more of a complex case. It wasn't super consistent, but yeah, the majority of these that we diagnose and we end up, kind of managing and treating are just, we look at them, we're like, yeah, they're not sweating.
Right.
But the diagnostic test for this is an intradermal terbutaline test.
Or epinephrine.
You can use that as well.
Both.
You can use both because epinephrine and norepinephrine are very much involved in that kind of process of activating these sweat glands in these horses.
And we kind of touched on that a little bit in the physiology of sweat. That's kind of the last thing that happens is epinephrine reaches that sweat gland and triggers that gland to start sweating. And so the whole goal of like an epinephrine sweat test is let's put a whole bunch of epinephrine. When I say whole bunch, it's like a tenth of a cc or half cc. It's not a ton. Right there in the dermal, and stand back, watch it, and they start sweating?
Yeah, it's cool. So they do the injections at different dilutions. Like it's usually down their neck, and then they put these little like absorbent pads on their skin, and you weigh them beforehand, and then you wait about 30 minutes, and then you weigh them again, and you see how much moisture they've taken in. It's very scientific.
Yeah, the way I've always done it is I put a bleb, about a half cc of epinephrine in the dermis, stand back and watch, does this thing start leaking fluid or not?
Yeah.
It's kind of usually it's like a yes or no.
Yes.
Mainly because I don't have the absorbent pads. I don't have a scale in my truck, and
yeah, I
don't know that anybody actually does.
No,
so,
I think this is a academia thing, but
yeah. So we're just gonna, but I probably haven't done that test in years because, like I said, clinical signs is the best way to diagnose this. If you got hyperthermia, high fever, absent of any signs of infection, and you have no sweat on your horse, anhidrosis. Especially if you start hosing them down and the temperature starts dropping.
Yes, or put them in front of a big fan.
Yes.
And the temperature comes down. Yes.
So let's talk a little bit. Let's go ahead and dive into some treatment.
There's a lot. There's a lot of hoodoo out there.
One of the things that we've said multiple times on this podcast, anytime you have a lot of different treatment options, it's because none of them work.
Correct.
Or work well. If you had one that was like a slam dunk and worked, you would only have one treatment. But when you have multiples, it means that probably didn't work.
Yes, this section of the podcast is pretty much all sourced from r/horses subreddit. So
yes, this is a bunch of trial and error, and one of the things I go through and tell people is like, I'm gonna give you a list of things to try. Maybe it works.
Maybe it works.
Doesn't.
But I feel like every horse has like their thing that works.
Right.
And they like roll with that, and like that's their thing.
The one thing that does work is getting them to a cooler climate.
Yes.
So I have got several horses that will leave here and they'll head to the mountains of North Carolina for the summer because they cannot take the heat down here. They get anhidrosis every year. And so we finally have just decided, all right, when summertime gets here and the dog days are here, so somewhere around May, those horses get to go on a mountain vacation for the summer. They head up to the mountains and they sweat fine. I've literally had horses, we moved from here to the mountains of North Carolina. You get up there and start sweating. Just a simple, anywhere from an 8 to 10 degree drop in temperature, and they start sweating again.
It's crazy.
And the craziest one I ever had was I had a horse that was down the Caymans. It's hot and humid year round down there. And this horse, he suffered constantly from anhidrosis. So we had a plane coming in. We're like, you know what? Let's get him out of here. We took him from the Caymans to Ocala. Now, I did not think that would be enough of a temperature change, but literally went from Grand Cayman to Ocala. Gets to Ocala, 3 weeks later, he's sweating again.
Wow.
Got pictures of him lathered up, pouring sweat.
That's insane.
And I think we flew him out in like June.
That is, June in Ocala.
June in Ocala.
Sticky.
Yes, I don't know how in the world, but that was enough of a temperature change to get his body to start sweating again.
Because again, it's a very individualized thing in these horses, and that's, again, when we kind of talked about the science of it, there's so many little pieces that go into the kind of process of sweating that, are there different parts that maybe this horse can't do this part, or can this horse not regulate their endocrine system, or this horse just, the humidity isn't allowing them to evaporate. There's so many things that, and I think that's why when we get into treatment of it, that some things work for some horses and they don't work for others.
And so that cooler environment, that's something it's important to create. Like when you have one of these episodes, if loading your horse up right then and moving him to North Carolina is not an option, then we have to figure out how to cool him off.
Right.
And I think it's important, like if your horse has a long hair coat, clip him. Get rid of the insulation. Get rid of that insulation. And just like cold water is a great way to drop it. And you also need a fan.
Yes.
Like you can't have one or the other. You need air moving across him, and you need water, because that's basically our evaporative cooling mechanisms. What we're triggering there.
Right, and shade and ventilation too are equally as important. I feel like there's a lot of places that we go to where they might have a little run-in shed, but there's no ventilation in there, and that shed it's hotter in the shed than it is standing out in the sun.
Well, especially if you've got metal roofs, it's pushing that temperature down. So you've got to insulate those roofs. You got to figure out how to stimulate some kind of airflow. You've got to have move, because that's the other thing. In Georgia, when that temperature gets above 85 degrees, you can't buy a breeze.
No.
Like the wind just stops.
It's true.
The wind will not blow until September here.
Correct.
Unless we get a thunderstorm. The wind quits moving. Mm-hmm. And so you got to create that ventilation using fans. Different barn designs can also have great ventilation that actually increase airflow. There's a lot of engineering that goes into that.
Yes, there is a lot of engineering. It's a lot of cattle barns I realize I've been in that like feel the best.
Controlling temperature in cattle barns, especially dairies, is critical.
It is.
And they have this down, like literally when I say down to a science. You've got engineers that have figured out how to create the correct ventilation to cool those barns.
Yeah, I don't know where they stop talking between let's build a barn for a cow versus a barn for a horse. That they just don't cross over. But I'm like the old like dairy barns we've been in. I'm like, these are the best.
Oh, I'm telling you, they have got it down.
They figured it out.
They can cool them.
Oh yeah. So
keeping those barns cool. One of the things that I actually use a lot of are those evaporative cooling fans.
Oh yeah.
Like Portacool was the first brand to come out with them. I think Big Ass Fans has got one, but they use they basically have water running over the back of the fan, and it's almost like where a greenhouse cools, and it pulls air through that water to cool the temperature of that air. And you're talking about a 10 to 15 degree difference in temperature just using one of those. And those have been highly, highly effective in cooling these down. So you can buy them. You can even, I found out the other day, you can rent these.
You can rent them?
You can rent them. You can call up an equipment. These equipment places have, they rent fans, air conditioners, things like that. They have whole divisions that do this. So if you don't want to own one, you can rent one and put them in, just put it in front of your horse's stall, blast them with some cold air. And again, we're getting a 10 to 15 degree difference in temperature, and it makes a big difference in these horses with anhidrosis.
Yes, it does. I mean, and you can tell almost immediately when that's the issue.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we'll have people that are, you know, kind of freaking out, and they're like, it's not going. They'll give them Banamine, it's not going down, and I say, put them in front of a fan.
Yes.
Put them in front of a fan.
Get water on them. Put them in front of a fan.
Cold water on them. Cold water. What about what's your opinion on hosing and sweat scraping off or leaving the water on?
The science has come out of endurance races show that you can't have a thick layer of water because water can be an insulator.
Exactly.
So cold water and then sweat scrape off, so you have that light layer of water on your horse, so that if you're just cooling this, like I don't know what the real math is here, but let's think about it. If you had an inch of water somewhere, the top of it's where it's evaporating. Well, the bottom of that water column is not getting cool enough to make a difference, and so you're actually insulating the horse's heat in. But if you have that thin layer where it can evaporate, you've essentially created evaporative cooling.
Yeah. And especially in environments like we're in, where evaporative cooling is reduced.
Non-existent.
So, you know, again, I think it's a very controversial subject, all the whether to leave them wet and all that. I think we were talking about this the other day because somebody had asked us, and a bunch of us got into a conversation in the office, and we were like, well, it kind of depends. It depends on where you are. It depends on how hot the horse is, and
yeah, humidity plays a big role in this too. And so I think I'm a big fan, and I love wells, like a well, because that water is cold. You know, like it's cold water, like it's 60 something degrees. Like you can cool the horse down quickly with well water. So I know that seems dumb, but
I just need a bumper sticker for Dan that says I love wells.
I do love wells. That's where water comes from. So, but you know, having those, getting them wet, getting them under a fan, and one of the things that too, like I don't know if you've had to experience this yet, but I've had some of these horses that are pushing that 107. We're getting IV fluid started,
yeah,
and then we start having to get really creative because I'll have a cooler full of ice, and the IV line running through the ice, getting the IV fluids colder, so we can get this internal body temperature down because we're bumping right on that edge of heat stroke. And I have rigged up a few things with coolers of ice and IV sets going through there. Some MacGyvering, basically building them on a radiator and cooling these fluids down before they go into the horse because we're bumping that 107. And unfortunately, the fluids, like if we're in the field, the fluids are in the truck. They're not cold.
And even if they were cold in the truck, now the second that they're out of the truck, everything's hot again.
And even if you just say, all right, I'll just take this bag and throw it in the refrigerator. By the time it runs through that IV line, it's heated back up.
It's heated back up, yep.
So that's one of the things I've done before, and luckily not that often, but you know, these horses are pushing heat stroke, and we're running cold fluids to them.
Yes.
Cold fluids. So, and so that's one of the things, like, you need to know what to do with that acute onset.
Yes.
Well, now let's get into the voodoo, and let's talk about, you've got one, you've saved them, they're not heat stroking. What do we do going forward?
What do we need to do? So, all the voodoo. I think the one thing that's consistent across all these guys is you have to get electrolytes back into them.
Yes.
So rehydration, water, absolutely important, but electrolytes are going to be just as crucial, if not more important, than the water itself. And, you know, not all electrolytes are created equal. I'd say a lot of people, they're like, well, they have a salt block. That's not enough.
No.
We say that horses are able to, you know, regulate their own salt, but they don't always do that.
If that worked, then we'd have never invented Gatorade.
Correct. And so, you know, making sure that your horse has access to these by giving it to them is going to be the most important. There's a lot of, you know, different pastes that you can dose it yourself, so you know the horse is getting to it. Just adding salt to your horse's food during the day works great. We talk a lot about sweet tea. here. There's a lot of different additives that you can add to the water that gives it a little bit of flavoring, and you can add some electrolytes directly into the water so that they're drinking them. There's a lot of different options, but making sure that your horse is getting electrolytes is going to be essential to keeping them hydrated.
It's one of the few times I'm in the summer, like, 'cause everybody always talks about put salt in their feed in the wintertime to keep them drinking. I'm not the biggest fan of that. But come summertime, having salt in the feed, making sure we're getting those electrolytes, because like you talked about earlier, sodium and chloride's our biggest ones that we lose. So, and then also potassium, and you can accomplish that with light salt.
Correct.
So if you look in the grocery store, they have light salt, and usually you can do like a 50-50 ratio of regular salt and light salt to be able to get the potassium back in.
So electrolytes, most important. One of the licensed products out there that is my personal preferred is 1AC.
Yes.
So this is an L-tyrosine, which is an amino acid. It's involved in the production of neurotransmitters, so epinephrine, norepinephrine, that are related to the activation for it. So this is something that there is some research behind it. University of Florida did it, so go Gators.
Terrible.
So this is the one that I personally recommend for any of our non-sweaters to get started on this. It's just a top dressing. It's powder you can add directly to the horse's feed. And I find that this one does help them.
It's definitely on my list. I always put this in. I think it's the closest one we have any science on, really.
Yes, pretty much.
And it works sometimes.
It's not all the time. It's not foolproof.
Right.
But it does. There is some science backing up that supplementing this neurotransmitter back to them is going to help.
Correct.
To this, or at least an amino acid that's involved in this transmitter, because we've tried to do that and it doesn't always work.
Yes.
So.
And then we get into why our podcast is sponsored by Guinness today. They're not actually sponsoring us, but if they want to send some cash this way, we won't.
Or some free Guinness.
Some Guinness.
Product.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll take some swag.
Dark beer.
Yeah, dark beer. So there's a couple different theories as to why dark beer works. The dark beer has a lot of B vitamins and yeast in it, and that's also supposed to somehow help with this neurotransmitter pathway. There's also the idea that any sort of alcohol, because you can also do a shot of Tito's.
I've heard that too.
I actually did one of those the other day on a horse, and it worked. But
they're very specific about that Tito's vodka.
Tito's is the best. So.
I'm not a vodka guy, so
yeah, but yeah, Tito's. I love me some Tito's, but one of the theories is that there's a big, vasodilation to the skin when the alcohol enters the bloodstream, and the sweat glands are extremely well vasculated, so doing that somehow kind of activates them a little bit more. Might be some Reddit voodoo, but
I've had people that swear by it, and horses I knew were non-sweaters, and they're swearing by Tito's vodka, and they're swearing by dark beer.
A lot of them really like the beer.
I mean, you kind of think about it, it's basically what they eat all day.
It is, yeah.
And who doesn't like a cold beer? I wonder if it needs, that's kind of the downside. They got to drink hot beer.
Yeah.
I think Guinness is supposed to be served like room temperature, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I mean, it's when you're in Europe, everything's kind of room temperature. There's no ice over in Europe, really. You have to pay for it.
Proud to be an American. Proud to be an American. It is kind of interesting because I have noticed back in my college days, I did sweat more when drinking beer. So
there you go.
Kind of makes sense. Acupuncture. I'm actually a big fan of this one.
Yes.
Acupuncture.
There's a lot of protocols for specifically with that, and there's actually some research that's coming down the line too with this.
The trick to this, and this is what I tell everybody, you have to start early.
Yes.
Like a lot of times once they've quit sweating, it's not as effective, but in talking to the people that utilize this, if they can start around April, May, before the clinical signs show up, before the real heat and temperature gets here, if they can start doing acupuncture beforehand, they'll see better results. So I'm a big fan of acupuncture.
And it's becoming more and more widespread too. I feel like I see more and more people getting certified in acupuncture.
Well, I look at it, and we've always said acupuncture is voodoo, but China's been using it for thousands of years. And I've actually had some acupuncture done. I thought it was voodoo until it worked.
You had acupuncture?
I did.
Wow.
My back was really messed up one time, and I was actually working on an acupuncturist's horse, a human doctor that's an acupuncturist, and she's like, just finish, and I'll take care of you. And I couldn't stand up straight. And so she's like, you need to get done because I'm an acupuncturist. There's no point in me doing that. And then you go on to work on this horse. And I was like, that makes sense. And I wasn't like cured, but I could not stand up straight. Like fell out of the truck, kind of bent over.
Oh.
And she got done. I stood up straight and could walk.
Hey, that's...
I still hurt, but I was markedly improved.
There you go.
So it's not fun, but I'm scared of needles, I'll be honest. But no, I have seen it be very, very helpful. And you know what my go-to, this is the most unscientific treatment method ever. But my go-to is basically acupuncture, Guinness beer, shot of Tito's, 1 AC, and hope one of them works.
Yes.
That's my go-to.
Yes. That's about mine, too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's about mine.
I'm like, throw it all at them. This is not scientific at all, but
No.
again, we've got all these treatments, and it's because none of them work.
None of them
all the
work.
time.
There's a lot of other things that I read, too, with, things they have tried. There's a lot of drugs that we use that will make them sweat. So if you've ever had your horse sedated for a procedure,
Right.
usually notice they get really sweaty. A lot of our anhidrosis horses, that doesn't work for them, or
Right.
it's not maintainable. It might work in that instance, but it's not going to work long term. They've tried to kind of basically microdose these horses with that. They've tried to microdose them with prostaglandins, specifically Lutalice. If your mare's ever had a Lutalice shot,
They sweat.
she sweats a lot.
Got a good old methyl dopa in there.
Yep, that doesn't work either long term. So
Well, and that kind of brings up an interesting point. If you have a horse that you know has anhidrosis and your vet's coming out, and let's say it's a new vet, let's say you moved somewhere, you've got a new vet, and you know your horse had anhidrosis in the past, this is something you need to make sure that you tell them. Because when we talk about sedatives, if it's 100 degrees outside, maybe that's not the time to float the teeth.
correct.
Maybe that's not the time to do certain things because we've got to sedate them, and a sedated horse can overheat very easily.
Very easily.
So make sure your vet knows that, understands it, and then make sure you're prepared because if they do have to sedate, let's say it's an emergency, we have to sedate, make sure you're set up to stimulate that evaporative cooling. Make sure like you're aware and know that unfortunately a normal horse, yes, you wouldn't have to do this, but your horse, you're going to have to work a little bit.
Correct.
So it's a really important thing. So,
Vitamin E was another one I saw too.
I saw that too.
I don't know what I feel like everything we say for horses is like vitamin E.
The good vitamin E.
Yes, a good vitamin E. I think we've talked about that on this podcast that not all vitamin E is equal.
No, and I think vitamin E does save the world.
It does.
I'm a big fan.
Yes.
But I think the important thing to remember is just know, like, the only thing that really works is a cooler climate.
Yes.
And then it's a matter of management. The other interesting thing I've seen with anhidrosis, a horse may have anhidrosis this year. We go through the wintertime, and next year, sweat fine.
They're fine. Yeah.
No anhidrosis.
It's not consistent.
No.
It's almost like these horses have a internal temperature gauge or something, or a humidity gauge, and if the temperature is this hot at this time of the year and Jupiter's in retrograde or whatever, it's like they're going to sweat, and then if not, then they're not going to sweat, and it's crazy.
Yes. So I think that's important. And I think that's, if I had my one takeaway from this is pay attention.
Yes.
Watch this. Know you've got it. Know you got to live with it. You're going to have to make some management decisions. And I think that's really critical. So, and for those of you that do have an anhidrosis horse,
I'm sorry.
Sorry. I'm a little concerned. I think my horse at home has actually got partial anhidrosis.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Partial anhidrosis.
He doesn't like going inside either.
He doesn't like going inside. He doesn't like to be in a stall. He does like the hose.
He likes, okay,
So
there you go.
we're rigging up some mister fans in shade trees.
Yeah.
So we're rigging those up. So he's got a little mister to cool that
Oh,
off.
okay.
Because he doesn't like going inside. He was born out in Nebraska, lived most of his life in Montana and Wyoming, and then I brought him to Georgia. And he's like, "What the heck?"
He said, where am I?
He's already against summertime. He's not a big fan of summertime to begin with, but now he's really like, I don't like it. And he's 26, and he's like, "Man, come on, let's get cooler."
You're gonna take him on a North Carolina mountain vacation.
He may have to go to North Carolina. I've actually been considering that. He may have to make a road trip.
Oh.
Because he already doesn't like the heat, and I really doesn't.
Yeah, and
So,
it's been a bad summer here too.
It really has.
It's been horrible.
Yep.
And we're just getting started.
So, I think let's talk about like what are your key takeaways. If you're going to tell like if people remember nothing else from this podcast, what do you want them to remember?
I think that this is a very widespread issue. This can happen to any horse at any time. A lot of times you don't really have much of a warning. So if, you come out and you notice that your horse isn't right, you need to get on some management and just know that there's a lot of products out there that nothing really is for sure, but what we can do is management.
Yes.
And that's, cool water, providing shade, providing ventilation, fans, misters, cold hosing, whatever you've got, do it. Clipping them, please.
Yes, please clip.
Please clip them. They would appreciate it.
Especially that, we see some of these horses have Cushings, and that's even been a little implicated. Like, Cushing horses tend to have a higher rate of anhidrosis than other horses, which makes sense because Cushing's, we know, is from the pituitary gland, and that hangs out next to the hypothalamus. It actually gets its orders from the hypothalamus. So if it's not doing what it's supposed to do,
Right.
then those horses also a lot of times have that longer hair coat. So get those horses clipped down. Because the other thing is that hair actually holds water. Not only does it insulate the horse, but the water it holds insulates them even more. Mm-hmm. And so it traps that heat in. So just be prepared. Like before summer gets here, go ahead and if you've got a horse with anhidrosis, have your plan ready.
Yes.
If you do get one with it, then you've got to get in the management business.
Yeah.
So
yeah, this is one of these things again because it can be fatal. This can go south very, very quickly. And and I know a lot of people are like, again, well, my horse has lived here their whole life. They've never had a problem. That does not make them immune to this, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, it does not.
No.
I think the other thing is pay attention. If you're planning on moving to the Gulf Coast states from a cooler climate, let's say you're living in Montana, you're like, for whatever reason, you're like, I think I want to move down to the Gulf Coast. Maybe don't do that in July.
No, don't do that.
Like let fall get here, then move your horse. So, and if you're going to be doing some imports, if you're going to be importing horses out of Germany, out of Europe, places like that, if you are bringing them in the summertime, make sure that you're prepared. Make sure you've got to do things because these horses are not used to the heat and humidity we have.
No.
So plan accordingly. So I think it was a pretty good rundown on anhidrosis.
That was fun.
And if our listeners are still there and they're like, I really didn't learn anything, well, welcome to the club because we don't know as much about this as we should.
That or you're one of our listeners that's in a different part of the country and you're like, that's a thing?
Yeah, what is that? They just stopped sweating? What the heck?
What the heck?
If any of our international listeners are listening, if you could let us know, like, we've got a lot of people listening in other countries. Like, have you ever seen this in those countries? Do you have any experience with it? Because I'd be curious to know. We got listeners out in South Africa and Australia. Do they have this issue?
I don't know.
I mean, be interested to know.
I would be curious to know. I know there's reports of it, I think originally starting in like India and like kind of the like Southeast Asia, which is
hot and humid.
So
hot and humid, yep. So I think that was kind of about the best we can do on a rundown of anhidrosis because we don't have a lot of options. Management. So, but thank you for being Guinness. And again, if Guinness or Tito's wants to send us some swag, we're up for it. So make these podcasts even more interesting. So Well, thank y'all for tuning in. Dr. Brown, thanks for being here today.
Of course.
April, thanks for recording all this. Casey, thank you for editing. Y'all keep sending your comments in, sending your questions. We're going to keep doing our best to answer them. We do have real jobs, unfortunately, so we can't do this as much as we'd like to. But
Maybe one day.
Maybe one day we'll just be podcast superstars.
Every day.
Like I said, we're like Joe Rogan, but veterinarians.
Hopefully less controversial. Casey, cut that
out. I don't know. I mean, some of the stuff we get into, I feel like in our world, it gets controversial.
Oh, yeah. There's some. Oh, man. We made a post about putting blankets on horses. And,
oh, man.
Man, we got a lot of traffic on that one.
Yeah. That's the one thing I give horse people. There's very little lukewarm. They hot and cold.
Oh,
so.
yes. They, again, you get on that r/horses subreddit and you can really ruffle some feathers on there.
I just try to stay off the interweb. Luckily, I don't know much about technology, so it's pretty easy to do. So. But thank y'all for tuning in. Thank y'all for listening. Keep sending your comments in. Keep sending your questions. We're going to keep working to get those answered. And we'll see y'all next week. Take care.
Bye.